Welcome to Biz Help for You with host Candy Messer. Entrepreneurs like to focus on the big picture, like profitability, success, and a smooth-running organization. But there always seems to be those little things like taxes, employee compensation, laws, regulations, and more. Now you can get the answers you need in one place. Join us today as we break it all down for you. Now, here's your host, Candy Messer.
Hello and welcome to Biz Help for You with Candy Messer. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you found the information on last week's show, Be a Confident, Strengths-Based Leader, informative. If you are unable to join us and would like to listen to the show, links can be found on our YouTube and Facebook pages, as well as multiple favorite podcast platforms. If you'd like to receive notifications on when our podcasts have been uploaded, please like and subscribe. And if there are topics you'd find beneficial or questions you have, please feel free to reach out to me at media@abandp.com. Now, let's learn a little bit about our guest today. Liz Wolfe is a business coach, author, and speaker who coaches entrepreneurs to get unstuck so that they can launch and grow an abundant business. She got her entrepreneurial start growing up on a sheep farm in Western Pennsylvania with her mother and two sisters. Later, she moved to New York City, where she created a successful computer consulting business with her husband, John. Eventually, she transitioned out of the technology business to coaching business owners to develop an abundance mindset. She recently published a book, The Power of Asking: How Your Reluctance to Ask Puts Your Business at Risk. Liz says that one of her greatest accomplishments is staying married to her husband for 25 years while running a business with him. Always eager to get in front of a crowd, Liz also plays the ukulele and is half of the singing duo Ukulicious. So, Liz, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much, Candy. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, I'm looking forward to this interview too, and the topic. The description sounds amazing. It very interesting, something that I haven't really talked about before. But before we get into the questions that I have for you, I'd love for you to just tell me a little bit more about yourself and how did you get started as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And I don't know if you got the joke as you were reading my bio, but my last name is Wolfe and I grew up on a sheep farm. So, yeah, I just want you to know that I've heard all the jokes. And that's my story. My mother, when she was about 5 years old, decided that she had had enough of city life. And she, with my father, moved to a farm out in Western Pennsylvania. And about 3 years later, my father decided, I am not a farmer. So he went back to his Westinghouse job. And my mother and my two sisters and myself, we became entrepreneurs. Now, that was not a word you talked about in the 70s. You didn't talk about being an entrepreneur. You talked about survival, family farms. That was the kind of thing that we did. But we ended up making a lot of products from the wool, spinning, weaving, knitting. We took the sheep to festivals and sheared them. And so we were a little bit of a sensation, a newsworthy sensation around there. But that was my beginnings of being an entrepreneur, at age 11, to be dressing up in a colonial outfit and going and spinning wool for people for money,
Mm-hmm.
And eventually I didn't want to be a farmer per se. So I eventually moved to New York City, and then I just had a life, it's never going to be a job for me. I've had jobs, but it was never going to be just a job. I did not have that kind of training growing up. And unfortunately, my mother did not do well. Eventually, she did not fare well. She eventually had to declare bankruptcy. I'm giving you the short story. And, I had my own business, very successful. And then it was more of a calling for me. I always feel that if only my mother had had someone like me who could take their business experience and share it with her and coach her, we could have done a much, much better. And she didn't have that. So that's who I like to be for people now in my business.
I think that's important too, because we all make mistakes in business, but yes, if we'd had a mentor who could guide us and say, hey, these are the things I've done and what worked, what didn't, that's definitely helpful. So I understand exactly where you're coming from. I feel the same. So But I want to get into, obviously the topic for today. And it sounds like, why you became a coach for entrepreneurs is mainly because of the situation that you saw with your family. And you want to make sure that business owners have an abundant business. So I would love to talk about the 3 keys that you talk about to bring about that abundant business.
Yes, the 3 keys to an abundant business. So this, again, I learned through my own experience of having a business, which I've had for 25 years with my husband. And, there's this idea that we have as entrepreneurs, we have this idea that number one, you're supposed to work really, really hard, right? We always hear about that, like it's the
Right.
hardworking. I did another podcast and when I talked about, it's all about working hard. And he said, yeah, there was a study done that people that work hard make 50% more money. And I'm like, okay, that's not my point.
Right.
And that may be true, but it doesn't, we have to look at everything to see,
Right.
why people are making 50% more money. But one of the things we think is if I work really hard and have really good time management. So we think that that's a key. Another key that I hear people talk about a lot is the idea that they have expertise or experience. So maybe they go and get certified, or a lot of newer entrepreneurs don't want to charge money because they think, well, I don't have the experience. How can I justify that? So we have this idea about experience and get to know the right people, right? So, right, we're always going to and go to networking events. I'm not saying don't go to networking events, but those I look at as like tools in your entrepreneurial toolbox. Mm-hmm. That if you do your best to stay focused and productive and sure, network and all that's great. But the problem with those 3 keys that most people think are the keys is they're all outside of me. In other words, what if I haven't met the person? Or what if I don't have the certification? Or what if I'm really bad at time management? Does that mean I have to spend all my energy focusing on getting more disciplined? So I've thrown those out, or at least I've put them in my toolbox. I've put them aside.
Right.
And what I've focused on are the 3 things that I know that I can influence, which is the following. Number 1, ask powerfully. So how can you get what you want if you don't even ask for what you want? This shows up in sales conversations. It shows up in just getting, better deals on things, even just being willing to email your list to say, hi, I'm out there. Come join me. That's ask powerfully. And then the second key, which is a little surprising, is give wholeheartedly. So we think, oh, I ask, I receive, but actually there's an intermediary step or key where you're giving. So if you want referrals, give referrals. If you want money, give money. And then the third key is to receive graciously. That's the third key. And the receiving and graciously go together. The gracious part is about gratitude. If I'm doing a longer session, I break that out into 4 different parts, but the part where everybody says, oh, I'm so up for receiving. Yeah, bring it on. And then, somebody gives us a compliment and we're like, not me, don't talk to me. So those are the 3 keys, and that's only the very surface of them. I wanted to present them first.
Right. Well, and I think when you're talking about, here's one of the things that people think it is, but it's not, is about, the time and working harder. But I do think that sometimes there are some that think, well, I'll just be here. I'll put, the word out on social media and sales are going to come. Right. So you still do have to put in the work, but like you're saying, it's not like you have to work yourself to death. Right. And to be able to get that success. So I think there's a little bit of a balance on that too, because I think sometimes people can go to one extreme or the other.
Yeah, we're not just sitting here going, okay, I'm ready. Please come to me. That's because the power of attraction, right? So and that's great. That's great too. I'm with you. Again, I look at it like a tool in my toolbox. Nothing is going to happen if I don't get up in the morning and do something. That's for sure. But how I'm being with it in that process will make a big difference.
Right. Well, and I think the ask powerfully is important too, because I think sometimes we're a little intimidated. And so maybe the way that we're asking isn't really clear on what we need. So I don't know if maybe you could even touch on explaining when you're asking, like, what's the best way to get your point across in a way that's not pushy either, but you're not also coming across as quiet and intimidated.
Right. Okay, I'm just writing a couple of words down I don't want to forget. So first of all, ask powerfully is what I mean by that is to be specific, about what you want. I always say it's not related to business, but I always say the reason I own 5 ukuleles, and yes, I own 5 ukuleles, is because I asked for them. I asked for them when it was Christmas, it was my birthday. Like I asked for them. And by the way, they're all different ukuleles. I just want you to know there are 5 different types of ukuleles, and I just have one of each, which seems reasonable to a ukulele player. So, but because I asked for them, I said it was my birthday, and my husband would say, "Is there something you want?" "Yeah, I want a baritone ukulele, and that's what I want." So that's why I didn't just say, "Oh, go research ukuleles, honey." No, I went online, I found the ukulele link, I sent it to him, and I said, "This is the one I want." So another example of that is the way we get very wishy-washy when we're on sales calls with people. We do not ask very specifically. So would you like to work with me? Or so are you ready to buy? Or so is that within your budget? All those little things that we write. And you mentioned it. You said we don't want to seem pushy. And asking specifically is not being pushy. It's being clear. That's what it's being. It's being clear. And that's a big difference. And then I'll just add one more thing, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts. The other thing that we're most afraid of, that's kind of the opposite of the pushy, is we're afraid of rejection. So we don't want to ask specifically because we don't want somebody to say, reject our specific idea.
Right. But I guess if you aren't even giving them the opportunity to say yes or no, then you just have them hanging in the balance, and like you still don't have the sale per se, but you don't know, are you ever going to or not? So I think we just have to get enough confidence to be able to just ask, like I said, ask the question, give them, clear opportunities to work with you. And if it's not the right fit, that's fine. Like there's no issue with not being able to work together. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the product or the service you have. It just doesn't fit their needs, maybe at the moment, maybe ever, but it's in the long run, it's best for both of you, because you're not going to be able to meet their needs. And then it would have a negative situation where you can avoid that now by finding out, now it's not the right time, or now it's not the right product or service, maybe ever. I think it is good to get that answer. But like you said, no one likes to feel like they're being rejected.
Yes. And there's so many things in what you said. So you said getting confidence. And what is the way you get confidence? Is you practice. So I do, haven't done it recently because of COVID, but I do a weekend workshop called the Abundance Breakthrough Course. And everyone's invited once I have it again. And we spend quite a bit of time on asking. And one of the things that I do is I have them do an actual exercise where they're with a buddy and they're practicing asking. And I'm not going to tell you the details just in case you ever do it, but it's really confronting. It's very confronting for people to ask. So practicing is really, really important. And you can practice by asking for little things first. Just ask for things, please pass the salt. I mean, it's silly, but true. I had a client who said he was at a restaurant and he didn't have any salt on his table. And so he looked over at the other table and he said, "May I borrow the salt?" And he said it was like so nerve-wracking for him because he was and it's just salt, right? So practice in getting confidence in that. And then to follow up with what you said about fitting your need, people are not rejecting you. People will only buy from you if your product or service solves their problem. They don't even care about you. I got news for everybody. They don't care about you. They only care about, are you solving my problem?
Right. And I think once you realize that too, it is a little bit easier than to make that ask, even because you're just saying, here's what I offer. And if you need it, great. If not, okay, we at least know that we're not. And maybe we know somebody else that can actually be a resource for them and provide that information.
Right. Which is really, really, well, that goes, you're leading right into the give wholeheartedly now, which is that the second part would be, could you even pass that along to somebody else? I did that recently. And the man that I obviously the woman that I referred to was happy, but the man himself was so happy because the person looking for a coach was so happy because he said, this other person will solve my problem, instead of me saying, well, I can't help you. And that was, that was like awesome. We all felt great at the end of that.
Exactly. So I would love to start talking about some of the mistakes that you see entrepreneurs making then, because, now you're talking about these 3 different keys and we're focusing sometimes on the wrong things. But are there other keys, or are there other things that you're seeing that entrepreneurs are doing wrong?
Well, one of the things we touched on earlier, is that I think people think they need more, especially newer entrepreneurs. They think they need more experience than they really do. I had actually a client recently, and this is very typical. People will say, well, I can't charge for my services because I just don't have that much experience, or I'm just starting out. Or a really common one that I hear is, well, I haven't figured it all out yet. So how are you expecting that I'm supposed to be helping other people? And once again, people don't, they're going to look at you and say, did you figure this out? Like, it's beneficial to me that I've been in business for 25 years because people look at my success as a business owner. Obviously, we want to be around people that have been successful. But again, what they really want to know is, can you solve my problem for me? And just because you haven't figured it all out doesn't mean that you can't solve problem for people.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. I've actually heard where somebody has said, you just need to be a couple steps ahead of them to be able to guide them. You don't have to have done everything. But I think a lot of times we feel, there's the term, the imposter syndrome, right? Like, oh, well, we're saying that we can help, but, we're not so confident yet. We're seeing other people who are great at it, and we're feeling, not so great about ourselves. And I think sometimes even that can come from outside of us too. So if you're feeling like, oh, I have to have more experience, I had a situation when I was new starting my business. I'd been doing it kind of home-based for a few years, but I opened an office, and I had a client who we were helping him with his payroll. And he had a CPA that did the bookkeeping and the tax and everything. And that person passed away. And so my client said, oh, I want you to take over the bookkeeping. And the person who bought the business is a CPA down here. Can you go pick up my stuff? And when I walked in, the guy looked down his nose at me. I was in my probably late 20s or so, maybe early 30s at that point too, but he looked down the nose and, who do you think you are you're going to be able to help this client? You're not a CPA, you're not, and he was trying to make me feel like, the lowest of the low. And thankfully, like, I realized like that person has an issue, like his CPA, after his name was super important to him. And so anyone else that didn't have that, he was going to look down upon. But that doesn't mean that I don't know my stuff, and that I wasn't able to help that client. I could help my client, and I helped him for many, many years until he retired. So, but I think sometimes that feeling of not good enough comes because other people tell us that.
Yeah, our entire life, by the way. I was just reading a Facebook post of a friend of mine who's quite significant in his leadership in his industry. And he said, yes, note to teacher who in 5th grade told me I was best off shutting up and sitting down, like that I should just keep my mouth shut. Thanks. By the way, that is a big reason, complete side note. I am a ukulele evangelist, right? I want to help people. I want to play with people. I want music in the world. So I will always carry 2 of my ukuleles with me anywhere I go. And you can't believe how many people probably listening to this right now will say, I'm not musical. I'm not musical. And 99 out of 100 people, when I ask, why do you think you're not musical? Somebody told them to stand in the back and sing softly. Right. Somebody, whether their family, a teacher, it's astonishing to me how many music teachers tell kids to be quiet or be in the back. And if you're a music teacher and you're listening to this, it's not personal. That's the stories that I'm hearing. So back to the imposter syndrome and I always will say to my clients, you're in the 1 step ahead program. I'm 1 step ahead of you. Everything you're doing, I'm doing. I'm growing my email list. I'm getting clients. I'm doing everything I can to be in the same way you are. So, and that's all that's needed. Because again, people are only focused on themselves. They're not focused on the problems you're having in your business.
Right.
And the more you can figure out in your business, the better you can help other people.
Right. So when you also talked about, the asking powerfully, it is, you need to be clear in your ask. Maybe someone thinks that they're being clear, but really it's not, or they're giving too many options, or maybe they're only giving one option. Like, what would you tell an entrepreneur about how they can improve how they're asking for that sale, or how they're asking for a referral, or like any of those kind of things that they might need? What can they do to improve how they're asking?
Yeah, believe it or not, one really important way is to actually be quiet and listen to people. It's remarkable how little listening that we do.
Mhm.
And if you ask a question and you're not getting the response you're expecting, or if you've asked and you're not getting either what you expect or hope for, then it's really great to ask for feedback and then listen to the feedback. So let's say I was on a sales call, I might say, so are you interested in buying my coaching services, or do you want the Mary Kay makeup, or whatever it is? And if they say, I'm thinking about it, or yes, or no, whatever they say, just ask them, how can you elaborate on that? Can you tell me a little bit more? If you are thinking about it, why you would? We tend to want to try to figure out why people wouldn't, but it's really helpful if we can help people to try to figure out why they would. Yeah, well, I'm thinking, I'm not sure yet. Oh, great. It sounds like you might have some interest. Tell me more about the interest that you have, about why you might want to do it. Or, because sometimes people will be wishy-washy, because that seems to be my word of the day, wishy-washy. But sometimes they'll be wishy-washy because they don't know how to say no. And if you can help people to get to more of an answer, that is really helpful too.
Right. Well, and I think, like I said, I've heard that sometimes people just give too many options, like, so here's like the top 10 things that I offer. And, and I've heard, them say that like a confused mind just doesn't make a decision. So what would you tell someone that says, but I have all these great products or services, and I really want to like give them all the options? Like, what would you say to help them narrow that down, or, maybe change so they have different offers? Like, what could you recommend for that?
Yeah, I think in my experience, 3 is a good number, so that you can give, and you'll see this on websites. Like if you go to even Netflix or one of those sites, right, where they'll say the basic plan, the middle plan, and the premium plan, and then the middle plan is the sort of highlighted, it's like pulled out a bit. And that's because most people will pick the middle one. So I offer my coaching in 3 months, 6 months, or 9 months, or sometimes 3, 6, or 12, depending on the person. But I recommend people start with the 6-month coaching program, partly because I know that works. Sometimes people pick the 3, sometimes people pick the 12, but mostly people pick the 6. You just don't want to, people do not want more choices. They want to know the right thing to do. Right. And they want help knowing what's best, right? People will come to me and say, well, and they'll often will say, well, how long is it going to be effective to work together? Is this like, a month, or is it 5 years? Like, what are we talking here? And so by me saying, from my experience, this is what I have found to be most helpful for people, is to start with this. And then some people continue, and some people that was just enough. And we work it out at that point.
Right.
But they are coming to you to have those choices. Go ahead.
Right. Well, I was going to say, I interviewed someone a couple of weeks ago on a podcast that was talking about like influence and things like that too. And he said, there is this conception that the customer is always right, but in some situations, maybe they're not. And it's your job basically to educate them, to help them know what is best for them in that situation. So giving more details, more of an explanation for them to really understand what you're offering, so that they can make an educated decision. Because if they don't have all the information, they might not make the best decision for themselves and miss out on something that really would benefit them.
Absolutely. Yeah, as again, people are coming to you because you're the expert in what you're saying you're the expert in, and they want to hear from you. They want to know. And it's a little bit like, little kids. I remember once going to, I have two children, but I remember once before I had children and therefore knew everything about children, haha, you know, watching a man standing in line at like a kind of a little fast food thing, and he's asking, so your 3-year-old, do you want hot dogs or do you want chicken nuggets or whatever? And I'm thinking to myself, does that child know whether he wants a hot dog or chicken nuggets or a hamburger? Probably not. Like, maybe don't give him that choice. Maybe just say, we're having hot dogs today, and then find out what the response is. So that's narrowing it down maybe a little too much. But the point is that more choices do not necessarily, it's too broad. People can't grasp that. And what do you think is most going to be impactful for them?
Yeah, I think that's really good information as well, too, because I think sometimes we do feel like, oh, well, let's just give them a little bit of information, let them make a decision. But if they don't have all the details that will help them really understand all of the benefits and the value that they're going to get from those services or the products that you're offering, then they might not understand what the best situation is for them. So I think it all comes back to confidence and knowing that you know what the products and services are going to do, and sharing that without feeling that you have to sell, right? You're not trying to sell, you're trying to just explain the benefits and let the customer understand if that's a good fit for them or not, and then again, if that doesn't work, if you know of something that might be a better fit, sharing that information so that they can get, what they need and kind of going from there. But I did want to touch on the receiving gracefully, because a lot of times we have a problem with that too.
Yes, we do, big time.
So being gracious and saying, if someone gives a compliment sometimes too, and like you say that we're saying like, oh, it's no big deal, or something. Oh, it wasn't that much, it didn't take too much time out. Like we have a hard time graciously receiving compliments or the things that are being offered to us too. So how can you help us be better at that aspect?
Yeah, well, we've been sold a bill of goods that's incorrect, which is this phrase that you've heard 1,000 times, which is better to give than receive. And that is absolutely false. And I'll tell you why. It's scientifically false. You cannot give unless somebody receives. Giving cannot occur without receiving, literally. Have you ever tried to give, bring a Christmas gift for some, or a little gift for someone at their party or something, and they're like, oh, you didn't have to. Well, thanks, but I did do it, right? So it isn't, they are equal energetic experiences. So giving and receiving are part of the same energy. And so part of it is it's practicing receiving, and the graciously part is thank you. All you have to do is say thank you. And then the giving has occurred. So the part about receiving, and I was thinking about this morning, I have just a couple of house plants. I'm not even if I grew up on a farm, I'm not a great green thumb. I forget to water them, right? And if you've ever noticed, if any of you out there have houseplants and you don't water your plant, when you pour the water in to water it, well, what happens? Typically speaking, when the dirt is dry, the water just runs right through it. I always take my plants to the sink because I know that the water is just going to go right through it. And that's because the context of the soil, the environment of the soil can't absorb it. It's too dry. And that's what receiving is. It's the same thing. It does not matter how much wealth you receive if you cannot receive it, or how much wealth comes your way, I should say, if you can't receive it. The same way a plant, if you do water it consistently, as I've learned, and you pour a little more water in, it just absorbs, just like a sponge, right? A dry sponge cannot absorb water as well as a damp sponge can. It's very interesting. We are the
Right.
same way. You got to think of yourself as the sponge.
And that's true too. I mean, sometimes we'll hear the example of you can't give from an empty cup, right? So you have to fill yourself up. So, you got to do something for yourself too. We take care of, ourselves. We could take care of others. So you sometimes hear it in that aspect, which is still hard, right? As moms or as businesswomen or something, sometimes we feel we're just like going and it's really hard to stop and relax and actually have self-care. Right. But usually that's when we hear about it is you need to kind of take care of yourself so you could continue to take care of others. But sometimes we don't always think of the actually receiving, whether, that's a compliment, whether it's a gift, whether it's a referral, whatever that might be. So just building the strength in all of these different aspects, of asking, giving, receiving. I think, it's sometimes a little bit difficult, but it's like a muscle that we can develop, right?
Yeah. Well, why is the cup empty? You have to ask yourself, why is the cup empty? I guarantee you that if we were really examine that, there'd be some no receiving occurring there, like asking for help. For
Right.
whatever reason, people don't like asking for help. It's a matter of honor, as we were taught, especially if you're a man, there's a lot of like, I should be able to do it myself. I had this
Right.
with my kids, my son, in high school. I'd be like, go to your teacher and ask him for help. I should be able to do it by myself, Mom. No, actually, you're not supposed to do it by yourself. That's what the teachers are for.
Right.
Right. And, this idea of a self-made millionaire is whatever, self-made business person. No, nobody does it by themselves. So if the cup
Right.
is empty, you could go with, well, I'm giving, 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 or you could look at, where am I not receiving? Where could I be asking for help and I am not? Because we don't do it. It's crazy but true.
So is there any other advice that you would want to share with the audience that maybe I didn't think to ask the right questions?
Yeah, let's think about that. Okay, yes, here's the tidbit I always like to leave people with. And this is related to receiving, actually. Sometimes people will start to work with me and then they'll say, I couldn't believe it. First of all, I couldn't believe it. Believe it, it's happening. Okay, I couldn't believe it. Just out of the blue, I was talking with a friend and she said, oh, I totally know somebody that needs a new whatever you sell. And you're like, that was just out of the blue. And I just want everybody to know that nothing is out of the blue, that you're creating it and your intention in creating it will make it happen. So it's very important to own what is occurring, and that is receiving. When you say, I don't believe it, what you're really saying is, I'm not receiving this. That's what you're really saying, because it is actually happening. I had a client once who's unfortunately her husband passed away, and she literally received $1 million check because it was a situation where there was a life insurance thing that occurred, and she accidentally recycled it. She found it again. Everybody just, she found it. But the conversation we had about that was, she couldn't believe it. It was unreal to her. So it was actually, we had to work on receiving that, horribly, tragically, this had occurred, but this was what he had set up for his, wife and family. And it was available to her, and it was really about receiving it. And that was very difficult. So it's kind of a dramatic story. As I like to say, cancel, nothing like that is going to happen for us. But what is occurring is happening. Believe it. All that beautiful, good things that are coming your way, because you're putting that intention out, is going to be because of who you are.
Right. And I think my final thought on that too is, when it goes back to the giving, it's being like authentic in terms of wanting to share resources, not like, well, I'm going to do this just so it comes back to me. It's really just wanting to help other people. And then, like you said, in the long run, things can come back to you, but it's not doing it with the expectation that you're going to get something from it.
That's right. That's what giving wholeheartedly is. It's just
Hmm.
give to give. It's all part
Right.
of the same energetic exchange, and
Hmm.
it's the way of contributing. Yeah.
Right. Right. Okay, so we're getting close to the end of the show, but I know you have an offer that you would like to share. So why don't you tell our listeners what that is and how they can access it?
Yes, thank you so much. So, as I mentioned several times, I am a business coach, and I do have a free business strategy session that you can go on my website, lizwolfcoaching.com. That's Wolf with an E. And you can sign up right on my website. If you have any questions about asking, giving, and receiving, or you want support around that, I absolutely will love to have a conversation with you. And it's free, and I'm available to you.
Perfect. So if we have anyone interested in reaching out to you, how can they connect with you?
So my website, lizwolfcoaching.com/contact. That's all my contact information. You can sign up for that call right there on that page. I also have other free resources on my website as well, but that's a great place to start.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Liz, for being a guest on my show and sharing your wisdom. I really appreciate your taking the time to chat with me today.
Yes, I appreciate it too. Thank you. And thank you to all your listeners. And go do it. Ask for what you
That's
want.
right.
Start there.
Perfect. So I do want to thank the listeners also for tuning in. I hope you found this topic interesting and that it answered some of your questions regarding the 3 keys to an abundant business: ask powerfully, give wholeheartedly, and receive graciously. If you have any additional questions or comments, be sure to reach out to Liz at the link she shared or send us a message at media@abandp.com. And would you please share our show with those you know? I'd greatly appreciate your support. I hope you can join us for next week's topic, 3 easy steps from clutter to cash flow. And please remember, you can connect with us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And my website is abandp.com. You can find the podcast posted on multiple favorite podcast platforms, including Google, TuneIn, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. Until next time, have a great week.
Thank you for listening to Biz Help for You. Please join your host, Candy Messer, again next Tuesday. Have a terrific week.